gladly.
Hello, I am Liam Ashcroft and welcome to another episode of This Is Saturn, a show that looks at all your favourite and not so favourite SEGA Saturn games. In this episode we'll be looking at one of SEGA AM2's most memorable hits, for those who played it, Fighters Megamix. So, another episode, another SEGA AM2 game. It's unsurprising AM2 were perhaps the biggest supporters of the SEGA Saturn when it came to first party games, due to the plethora of arcade ports he put out. In particular, Virtua Fighter 2 was a critically acclaimed success on the Saturn, as many felt it succeeded in leaps and bounds when it came to bringing the arcade experience home. For those unaware, in which case where the hell have you been, Virtua Fighter was Sega's attempt at breaking into the arcade fighting genre. With Yu Suzuki at the helm, it was going to be difficult for it to be anything short of fantastic, and if that wasn't enough, Virtua Fighter created the 3D fighting game genre, using polygon graphics and giving a 3D playing field for the characters to battle in. The initial Saturn port of this game wasn't very well received, but its remake and especially its sequel were incredibly well received, and Virtua Fighter 2 is commonplace in many people's favourite Saturn games. Hell, perhaps even their favourite fighting games of all time. However, whilst Virtua Fighter sought success, SEGA AM2 put out another arcade fighter that got significantly less hype, Fighting Vipers. Virtua Fighter's focus was on realistic martial arts combat, a contrast to the fantasy elements of Street Fighter such as the Hadouken and Mortal Kombat's fatalities. Fighting Vipers was more in the vein of the latter. Okay, so there were no fireballs being flung about and no ultra gory finish moves either, but particularly the cast of Fighting Vipers set it apart as a more tongue-in-cheek version of Virtua Fighter. The characters are about as 90s as you can get, with somewhat silly but fun designs, and some characters employ the use of weapons such as Picky's skateboard and Raxel's guitar. As if that wasn't enough, in the Japanese SEGA Saturn version, Pepsi Man, Pepsi's Japanese mascot at the time, appears as an unlockable character, and also found in the arcade game's code were unused characters such as Yuji Naka and Sonic. Well then. Particularly, a feature unique to Fighting Vipers was its armour gimmick. That is, every character has destroyable armour that, once broken, leaves you with a health bar made of wet toilet paper. It was a pretty neat gimmick and added some strategy as you tried to focus your strongest attacks where the opponent's armour was positioned. Also of note was that rather than Virtua Fighter's arenas that allowed characters to be knocked out and insta-KO'd via ring out, Fighting Vipers' arenas took on the form of caged environments that were walled in. Performing a strong enough finishing move on the opponent would send them straight through these walls, which is quite an awesome sight. As I said, Fighting Vipers never really reached the heights of Virtua Fighter, and the only thing that came out of Fighting Vipers afterwards, besides a PS2 and HD remake, was the Japan and Europe exclusive sequel. Perhaps also of note is that Fighting Vipers' engine was reused for Sonic the Fighters, that one Sonic fighting game that wasn't very good. Certainly though, don't let Sonic the Fighters be indicative of this game's quality. Now I prefer Fighting Vipers and its more wacky casting gameplay to Virtua Fighter. It's a crying shame it didn't reach the same popularity as Virtua Fighter, because if there was one fighting game I could happily play for the rest of my life, it'd be Fighting Vipers. Actually I say that, but there is one game I'd rather play, so how about we actually discuss Fighters Megamix? Fighters Megamix was released towards the end of the Saturn's life as a kind of last hurrah for the system before the Dreamcast came in to act as Sega's final stand. As I mentioned, AM2 put out a plethora of quality titles throughout the Saturn's lifespan, and so decided to try and condense all of that greatness into a single game. One big celebration of SEGA AM2's work. Fighters Megamix was the result, and damn what a result it is. At its core, Fighters Megamix is a crossover fighter bringing all the characters of Virtua Fighter 2 and Fighting Vipers together for one big scrap. Also hyped the hell out of in the marketing for this game was the amount of preview content relating to Virtua Fighter 3, which was planned to be released on Saturn at the time. The Virtua Fighter 2 cast have a few new moves lifted from Virtua Fighter 3, and a few other bits and bobs have been lifted too. Most notably, the escape function from Virtua Fighter 3, indeed lifted straight from Virtua Fighter 3's ROM as the manual proudly proclaims, that allows characters to step into the foreground and background of the arenas to dodge attacks is present here, which is a nifty addition to the roster of features. Even the announcer of Virtua Fighter 3 and the attract mode theme are present. They really wanted to promote the hell out of the game, which in the end was kind of pointless, seeing as the Saturn version got canned. Virtua Fighter 3 aside, all of the content of Virtua Fighter 2 and even some from Virtua Fighter 1 is present here, perhaps with the exception of ring-outs, as arenas are now effectively infinite. All of the characters and stages from Virtua Fighter 2 are here, as is that awesome soundtrack, and the gameplay with the characters is the same as in the Saturn port of Virtua Fighter 2. No real additions or changes save for the Virtua Fighter 3 moves. The same can be said of the Fighting Vipers side of the cast, who don't have any new moves to boast of, but retain their armour over the Virtua Fighter characters. All of their stages return too, and retain the walls of the original game, and yes, said walls can still be broken by KOs. Under the game's options menu, there's even a setting for whether you want the gameplay style of Virtua Fighter 2, or the more fast-paced Fighting Vipers engine. I stick with the Fighting Vipers engine myself, since I do prefer that game's mechanics. But that's not to say Virtua Fighter 2's style is poor, after all it was critically acclaimed for a reason. That said, the game isn't just a basic crossover of the two games, that'd be too easy. Rather, AM2 have added a slew of content not found in the arcade or in some cases Saturn versions of either Virtua Fighter 2 or Fighting Vipers. This is most noticeable in the character roster, which I'll get into later. Anywho, since Fighters Megamix was one of AM2's only fighters not to get an arcade release, it stands to reason there's no arcade mode as with most fighting games. That's not to say there's no single player at all though, this is far from the case. Instead of a traditional arcade mode, the game provides lettered courses. There are 9 courses in total, ranging from A to I. The game doesn't place these in order of difficulty or anything, rather the fighters in each course fall under a common category, such as the Virtua Fighter course being composed of, well, Virtua Fighter characters, and the girls course, take a wild guess. Beating each course yields a reward in the form of a new character, and damn do we have some variety here. You start off getting relatively shoddy characters. Hell, for beating the first course, all you get is an alternate costume for the character Hoodie from Fighting Vipers. However, as the courses progress, you begin to unlock slightly better characters. Actually, I say better characters, but truth be told, if there's one thing this game lacks, it's balance. Because something tells me Dural, the final boss of Virtua Fighter, versus Sarah from Virtua Fighter Kids isn't exactly going to be an even matchup. The unlockable characters of Fighters Megamix pay homage to games besides Virtua Fighter 2 and Fighting Vipers. For example, beating one of the later courses unlocks Seba. Who's Seba? A character who was cut from Virtua Fighter 1. He even has a blocky costume referencing the graphics of the original Virtua Fighter game, which is an incredibly nice touch. As if that weren't enough, 2 characters from Sonic the Fighters, Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear, also appear perhaps in reference to the cancelled Saturn version of Sonic the Fighters. Bean even has an alternate costume that changes him into Bin from Dynamite Ducks, which is nothing short of friggin' cool. Other characters include Janet from Virtua Cop, who brings a gun to a fist fight and uses the moves of Aoi from Virtua Fighter 3, Taro from Rent a Hero on the Sega Mega Drive, whose armour runs on batteries, meaning that if his battery power runs out his suit is lost and he's left incredibly vulnerable, unable to do many of his moves, Kuma-chan, a completely unarticulated bird thing that seems to feed on the souls of weeping children, the Virtua Fighter Kids versions of Akira and Sarah, and another insane unlockable moment from AM2, such as the horse in Daytona USA Saturn. The Hudson Hornet from Daytona USA is a playable character in this fighting game. Awesome! Now, as I mentioned earlier, truth be told, a lot of these characters aren't particularly amazing. The kids' characters have pathetic range, and the Sonic the Fighters characters do barely any damage. Even the Hudson Hornet is crap, as he's incredibly difficult to use, and he's as slow as hell despite being, you know, a machine built for racing. But let's face it, the fact that the Hornet's in this game as a fighter in the first place kinda cements the fact that this is not some kind of super deep tournament heavy fighter. Is that a bad thing? No, of course not. Yes, the game is unbalanced, but I think that's what gives it so much appeal to me over other fighting games. This is indeed my favourite fighting game of all time. The game doesn't focus on flashy combos or incredibly technical gameplay, it's there to provide the player with a good game and a fun game, and it succeeds. If there's one thing Fighters Megamix proves, it's that not every fighting game has to take itself so damn seriously to be fantastic. Yes, perhaps in the eyes of elite tournament players this is blasphemy, but fuck 'em. Now to be fair, Fighters Megamix doesn't do much different in the gameplay department. It is at its core a fighting game. It's got the same mechanics as every other fighter, half-forward, semicircle, does special moves and the like, but it takes this tried and tested way of doing things and gives it some more appeal, at least in my opinion. Anyway, back onto the topic of arcade mode. Also worthy of notice that beating each course rewards a different credits sequence, each with some nice music and some pictures to keep the thing entertaining. In terms of the credits music, whilst it varies between courses, it's all pretty good, and interestingly, one course rewards you with a credits theme of Shenmue! Yes, that Shenmue, the one that was only released a few years later on the Dreamcast. Not bad at all, Yu Suzuki. The pictures are a more considerable topic, perhaps a hotter topic depending on how you look at the situation. Several pictures from the credit sequence were changed in the American version of this game, particularly one picture involving the Fighting Vipers character Honey in a well. Look for yourself whilst I pray the image doesn't get the video taken down. Although I'm not sure if this works in the US releases, putting the disc in a PC also gives you desktop wallpapers, including the infamous Honey image. Have you got the guts to set the image as your desktop background? I don't care. Suffice to say, this kind of imagery was just too much for Sega of America, and so the image, along with several others, was removed for the US release of the game. I'm in Britain though, and so as with Sonic CD and its two soundtracks, we basically got the Japanese version. Actually, this goes for the whole of Europe, including SEGA systems. I mention SEGA systems because all PAL units of the SEGA Saturn contain a converter for French SEGA games, which is useful because my copy of Fighters Megamix is not only mint, but I picked it up from a used game shop in Rennes in France. So yeah, useful. All the talking I've already done, and I've still barely scratched the surface. An almost obligatory feature is the Versus mode, in which you can have a one-on-one single match against a friend or, crucially, against the CPU. I say crucially because a lot of other arcade ports I've played restrict fights for single player to arcade modes and the like, so being able to fight a CPU opponent of my choosing at will is fantastic and a welcome addition to the game. In addition is Survival mode, which challenges you to stay alive for 3, 7 or 15 minutes on a single life bar. No easy feat. Survival is a rather nifty addition to the game, and I reckon it's worth a look. Team Battle mode is perhaps my area of least experience. Rather than somehow doing tag team action a la Marvel vs Capcom, Team Battle lets you choose 8 characters and pit them against a CPU or human opponent's team of also 8 characters. These kinds of modes just don't interest me all that much in games, but it's an alright alternative to Versus mode if you want to mix things up a bit. A de facto training mode is also present, but rather than just giving you a dummy to beat up and calling it a day, training mode also displays the commands for each move of every character, except unlockable characters, and actually ticks off any move you manage to pull off, which is a good way of encouraging progress with regards to learning move commands. Though that's not to say I'm actually good at okaying these moves, as fighting game D-pad movements continue to be my #1 weak point. Still, the effort to encourage progress is appreciated even by someone as crap as me at fighting games. Besides the characters, there are also a ton of secrets and references. I've read that holding the C button as the Fighting Vipers final boss Big Marla's stage loads reveals the F-14 Tomcat of Afterburner fame, though I can never get this to work, so I assume there's a Japan exclusive or something. Also, a gallery for all of those portraits from the credits is available, and by going through some bizarre instructions, a card matching minigame can be unlocked that reveals a somewhat different version of Janet from Virtua Cop's ending portrait. Charming. Afterburner also receives another reference in the form of the record screen music being City 202 of Afterburner 2 fame. The name entry theme also takes the form of Last Wave from Outrun, and as mentioned, Ben from Dynamite Ducks makes a cameo as Bean the Dynamite's alternate costume. The Hudson Hornet even gets a track in the form of the 3-7 Speedway from Daytona USA, complete with the King of Speed playing in the background. As absurd yet as awesome as it sounds. Even a few ending portraits reference other AM2 games like Sonic the Fighters. There's plenty for AM2 diehards to grin at here. Fighters Megamix isn't for someone out for a serious tournament-orientated fighter, there's no disputing that. I personally see that as a blessing, not a curse. Fighters Megamix is the most unique fighting game I've played this side of Super Smash Bros, and for that I applaud it. Certainly I'm not saying some better balancing would have gone amiss, because I really want to enjoy playing as the Hornet as opposed to getting my arse kicked whenever I play as it, but for what it is I have to echo the classic game room sentiment. The question is not whether Fighters Megamix is the best fighting game on the Saturn, but whether it is the best game as a whole on the Saturn. It's certainly up there with gems such as Knights and Sega Rally for me, and I for one am very glad I accidentally stumbled upon that retro game store in France where I found this game. The first game I got for Saturn, and what a game! Thanks for watching this episode, everyone, and I'll see you next time on This Is Saturn. Special thanks goes to Gaming Hell for providing incredibly in-depth research on the game, all while providing some laughs. You can find a link to the site in the description below.